And welcome back to America Right Now. With the Georgia Senate runoff elections approaching rapidly, is the state ready to host a fair election, or are we going to see a repeat of November all over again? What do the campaigns need to do now to ensure the integrity of the vote? Let's bring in our panel to discuss. William McGinley, principal of the Vogel Group and former White House cabinet secretary under President Trump, and Thane Rosenbaum, distinguished university professor at Touro Law School. He's also the author of Saving Free Speech from Itself. Bill, let me start with you. Democrats have been working the mail-in vote angle again very heavily. They claim to have more than 1 million mail-in votes already requested. Is the state ready to ensure a fair election, or are we just going to see deja vu all over again here?
So the Republican Party and the campaigns have to force the transparency that was needed before the 2016 election. They do that by making sure that they have the manpower not only to man the early vote locations, but also the counting locations and receipt locations where the absentee ballots are going to start coming in. This is a critical part of any election day operation, because this is what gives you the early warning that something may be afoot. And so the Georgia Republican Party, both Senate campaigns, the NRSC, everybody else needs to be fully manning these stations. The other thing that they need to be doing is they need to be filing open record requests with the county registrars where these votes will actually be counted. And the reason that they want to do that is they want to make sure that they're not going to see some of the stuff that was pulled in Philadelphia, where the observers were kept 100 feet away, then 25 feet away, where there was no meaningful opportunity to observe the count. Now is the time to start pressing on that.
Right.
And the other benefit of doing an open records request is it takes you outside the election law and gives you a separate statutory regime to march into court to force the disclosure from these election officials.
Professor, a number of the courts have ruled, who have ruled on the Trump elections fraud cases, have indicated that the campaign really should have gotten their act together before the vote. They could have litigated a number of their issues before the election. Really, to Bill's point, should the Republican campaigns here be looking at options for how they can ensure the process is fair, utilizing the courts to do it? The other thing that Bill didn't mention, but I think could be available, is also getting impound orders for machines and ballots as well. But your thoughts on what they could be doing now, utilizing the court system ahead of time?
Well, you're right, Tom. There's a fateful error in not bringing these cases before, although there was a case that was before the Supreme Court on an emergency position out of Pennsylvania that got kicked down the line till after the election. But the real point here is the concern over the mail-in ballots, because remember, all of the judges in over almost 80 of them of the 50 lawsuits, what they focused on was widespread. That was the word they were talking about. There's no evidence of widespread fraud, and there were no evidentiary hearings able to demonstrate the amount of discrepancies, modifications, the various shifts in the election laws that were done without legislative approval. So the real question is now, does Georgia feel free to conduct the same kind of election where signature verifications are going to be suspended or modified, where canvass workers can fix defective ballots by providing missing information? Do the Georgians now think that since the presidency allowed these shifts in light of the pandemic, that this very same kinds of changes to election laws and different standards between precincts, this is very important. Even in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court said that the states have to have a unified system of elections. And Georgia was clearly a very outlier state where you were subject to much higher scrutiny if you stood in line with your driver's license than if you mailed in your ballot from home.
That's something that definitely needs to be addressed by the state. Bill, the president's veto on the defense bill likely to be overridden Monday and Tuesday. There are votes already scheduled in the House and the Senate. His a bit of a switch in position on the COVID-19 bill at the 11th hour, angering many in the GOP Senate. Do you think that between concerns about the election integrity and then also these sort of this tension between McConnell and the president now, that could have an impact on turnout in the Georgia election?
Look, I think that definitely it's going to resonate. What the president said this last week on the COVID relief bill, I think resonated with conservatives. I think as he went through the litany of provisions in there that were completely unrelated to the pandemic and relief for American businesses and the public health systems trying to deal with this public health crisis. I think that was a strong speech. And then he laid out the political case why Congress needs to keep its focus, its eye on the ball on the American people. I do think that it also demonstrates the reason why the two Republican senators, Loeffler and Perdue, need to be reelected and sent back to the Senate.
Right.
Because if you want to preserve President Trump's legacy, if you want President Trump to have any shot on January 6th, he's got to have those two seats in Republican hands. And Senators Perdue and Loeffler have actually been pretty strong in support of President Trump. And so I think conservatives across the state of Georgia need to listen to that, own their vote, understand how you're going to vote for this runoff, make sure that you vote and call your friends and neighbors who are also supporters of the Republican Party and President Trump and make sure they turn out.
Absolutely.
This is a voter turnout election. This is going to be a daily grind. And right now, the campaigns and the parties are not focusing just on winning the day. They're focusing on winning the hour, both in terms of the news cycle and in terms of politics. And the data operations have to be ramping up so that they can track who's voted, who hasn't, so that they can micro-target their get-out-the-vote operations.
All right, everybody does need to get out and vote. William McGinley and Professor Rosenbaum, thank you both for your insights.